Okay, we're recording good. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick roll call just to ensure we have documentation of a quorum. So I'm going to start out if you can unmute yourself, or Fabiola, do you have to unmute them?
No, they can unmute.
You can unmute yourself when I call your name and let me know you're present. That would be great. Maxwell Lung.
Yes.
Thank you. Murray Stein.
Here.
Okay, thanks, Murray. Timothy Nolan.
Here.
Thank you. Ryan Tracy.
Oh, he resigned.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Okay, so Ryan isn't here. Steve Cottrell.
Present.
Thanks, Steve. Matt Lascala.
I'm here. Thank you.
Joe DeMena.
Joe's on vacation.
Okay, thank you. Jay Neary.
Present.
Thank you, Jay. Elizabeth Brady. All again for Elizabeth Brady. I didn't see Elizabeth here, so she is absent. Jean Guachon. I'll call again, Jean Guachon. You see it online? Okay. John Juan is absent. Victor Hugo Ramos Sanchez. I'll call again, Victor Hugo Ramos Sanchez. I don't hear Victor, so mark him absent. Ty Garber. Call again, Ty Garber. Ty Garber, absent. Nathaniel Allen.
Yeah.
I know he's here in the room with us. Thank you. And then we have two vacancies, one for the registered dispensary agent and one for the lab scientist. So again, if anyone knows anyone out there might be interested in those, please. Or sorry, three. Next page. Thank you. We're also missing a licensed healthcare provider. So for those three spots, if you've anyone who might be interested, please let us know and we'll talk with them, see if they qualify. That's what I thought. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We've got 8 people, including myself, so we need one more.
Sorry, can't count.
You do need one. Sorry, everyone. If you know anyone out there who should be on this call, feel free to give them a quick text and or email and ask them if they could join. That would be great.
Do we not have a quorum yet?
We're at 8 people. We need 9 for a quorum. So one more person would get us there. And I think everyone responded that they would, well, the majority of people responded they would be here, so we should have had a quorum.
You know, Steve Cottrell sometimes has multiple personalities. Can we count him?
Thank you, Murray.
All of his personalities, they still only count for one
They
position.
only count for one.
One council position.
I have a question. The ADA is supposed to have a position, and I know that Ann Torres is on as a viewer. Can she not be representative of ADA? Question mark.
No.
Tim Nolan is present and he does fill the ADA position.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, Victor Hugo Ramos Sanchez, we see you just. Perfect.
Now we have quorum.
That's great. So we have quorum. Thank you for joining. That gets us to 9 people. So we can go ahead and proceed with our meeting. Great. Okay. So quickly, I'll just do a quick review, as I always do, of our council charges. ARS 36-2821C, the advisory council shall annually review the marijuana testing programs under this chapter. 28.2 of this title, and on or before the second Monday in January of each year, the council should submit to the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Health and Human Services Committee, chairpersons of the Senate and the House of Representatives, and the Department of Health Services, a report that does not disclose any identifying information, and this report must include the following. Number one, an assessment as to whether an analyte should be removed from the required statutory testing panel. Second, the number of statements of deficiencies relating to testing that were issued to each nonprofit medical marijuana dispensary, third-party independent lab, marijuana establishment, and marijuana testing facility within that preceding year. The remediation efforts made to address each deficiency and the resolution of each statement of deficiency. The information may not disclose any identifying information, but shall delineate the information by entity. And finally, the report should also include any other recommendations on improving the testing programs. So with that, I think we're ready to move into our next item on the agenda, which is sampling plans as required by ANSI ASQ in the rule. And Nate Allen will be talking on this topic today.
Just 1 second before we turn it over to Nate, I believe Elizabeth Brady did join us. Elizabeth, can you confirm?
Yes, I did join.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. We've got you listed here. Thank you.
10 members.
And members, thank you.
And welcome to the council. Thank you.
Okay, Nate, if you're ready, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay.
Did you have slides that you want to display up there? And
Yeah, some various things that I'm going to show. It's asking me to restart.
oh no, that's what always happens. Yeah, we'll just bear with us a few minutes here till we get the slides up. A few technical difficulties, but we should get there in a minute. Okay, I think they're coming up. Can everyone see Nate's slides?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Nate, take it away.
Okay. So today I just wanted to talk about what appears to be a common finding. You know, we've got some representatives from the state, we've got others in production. May come across this from time to time, but I've noticed in the last few MMTAC reports that one of the commonly infracted rules is really around what I think you summarize as a sampling plan. But that phrase isn't actually used in our rule, right? Sampling plans. It's used in reference through ANSI ASC 1.4. So I just wanted to point out, if you haven't been to ANSI ASC's website, it's worth exploring. It's worth going to and reading some of the content. Our state has adopted Z1.4 as the inspection by attributes approach. There's a Z1.9. We come across some of this stuff from time to time. Last year, I think Halo and Murray's group did a really good job of trying to understand better some of these rules. It's very complicated when you buy Z1.4 and you have to pay for it. It's a few $100s. It's worth downloading because we're required to follow it. But it's about 100 pages of pretty technical stuff. So I always made an assumption when it originally got adopted that we were referring to it mostly as a counting tool. It was, how do you figure out what is representative of your whole? Because it's not practical to test all of your batch. So I wanted to pull up the rules, and I'm not sure if it's gonna let me switch what I'm presenting. Yes, it will. Okay. Anyway, the commonly cited rule is in this administration, and there's a few rules that talk about the same thing, but one is who is pulling the samples that get submitted to the labs. I'm not suggesting that it needs to change from anything, but right now, either the dispensary license or its sub-license can provide those samples, or a lab agent can enter the facility and collect those samples. I believe all of the labs we report what we see and what we receive. But this is something in rule that could be allowed for, and it might be convenient for producers. There might be hesitation to let the lab agents in, but it also might take a certain level of burden off of you if they're the ones following a standardized sampling protocol and entering your facility. So that's not really the purpose of the presentation, just something to point out. But it's this R917310 A2D, and it's the method for ensuring that a sample is collected representative of the batch. And I think the discussion that I want to have is this term representativeness, because I've heard out in market the idea that randomness is what people are pursuing. And it's important from an analytics standpoint, statistically speaking, random is not representative, right? So no fault of anybody that randomly pulls a sample and gets it tested and then makes inferences about the whole batch based on that. We've had some of that in this state where it's been reported on. That's not really the scientific method for proving or disproving whether or not something is contaminated or whether or not it conforms or doesn't conform with the attributes that are established for testing. I make an assumption. The attributes that we test for are table 3.1. So it's kind of a pass fail. Everything is in line with what's required, or it's not. Maybe that could be clarified. It's an assumption we make. I make an assumption that when you've aggregated your representative portions, that you normalize your population. And that phrase, normalizing the population, would require you, and the state can tell me whether or not my opinion is wrong, and I'll accept their decision. But if you don't normalize it when you aggregate it before you send it to the lab, how could you quarter it down into a sample that was still representative of the aggregated portion, right? So I am suggesting that there might be a homogenization requirement at that stage, but it's not entirely clear whether you can touch it or not touch it, right? So, but in order for a representative sampling to be collected so that it's not random, you literally are trying to make sure you get something, a little bit of all of your batch from everywhere in your batch. And so I've long been suspicious that sometimes these fails are random fails. There's a difference between random fails and representative fails, right? But the most critical thing is, how is the sample collected? Because I do think the labs, even though last MMTAC, we talked about standardizing the testing method for potency and perhaps other parameters, the biggest driving factor of the test results is the sample itself, right? So these are some areas that I think are worthy of discussion. To be representative, I don't think it's going to let me share certain screens, but essentially the batch sizes, we've talked about it. There's been different legislation and rulemaking that maybe has passed or hasn't passed. From an analytics standpoint, it doesn't matter what the batch size is. It only matters that the sample portion you collected was representative of the whole, right? So I think it benefits groups if they want to take the economic risk of having the ability to do bigger batches. They just need to make sure that they're following the sample protocols tightly. So anyway, with that said, I think I'm still presenting rule.
Yeah.
Okay. So, really this was designed to just open up a discussion. we've had years now with this. Z 1.4 is technical. You get into it, which makes it complicated. So, some clarity around that, but I think it's the entire council's responsibility that in order to help improve the program, maybe we take some of these findings each year and we start to dissect them a little bit and then put forward recommendations to sort of help compliance and conformance, those standards. So that's kind of the subject matter that I wanted to bring up.
I think Steve Cottrell. Steve, did you have a question or comment?
No, my only comment was ask Nate how he was proposing that a large cultivation does this, but through homogeneity of the sample, that's the best way. And he did cover that. So
yeah, and it's unclear whether or not they can take that step, right? But if I were assuming that I'd received a representative sampling at the lab, I probably would see a homogenized flower sample, right? And this is theoretic still, so this is my opinion and it's theoretic. So I would like to see, what we don't have is, we have to assume that this is a normal population distribution, statistically speaking. And if it's not, if tested samples fall outside 1 or 2 standard deviations of that curve, then it's not a normal population and you can't apply ANSI Z 1.4 to it. I don't know that we have enough data yet to determine, and I'm sure there's a distribution if we collected more data. But one of my back of the mind thoughts is, do we have a standard that's really hard to hit with something that's so heterogeneous? So I don't think we have an issue nearly as much as we isolate. We extract the materials, we get closer to an isolated compound. But as a plant itself, this is just no 2 buds on the same plant are going to test the same way, let alone, anyway. So does anybody have any thoughts or comments?
Murray has a question.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I think the movement towards sampling and trying to provide guidance for, our cultivators and manufacturers is a really good thing. We pondered this a lot. What really makes it, tangible, though, I think, is a case study or an example of how you deal with this. For example, the idea of taking a number of random samples from, say, a room that undergoes a harvest, I can see the practicality of that, but what do you do with these samples? How do you homogenize them? What happens to the flour when you try to, what are you going to grind them? And then take some representative number of grams from that and send it? Will you cause some unintended destruction to the plant in the process? In the same way, edibles, like how do we go about providing a set of samples that can be homogenized without throwing away a lot more product than we would like to, or otherwise compromise in the process. So that's the question. It's like, how do we establish homogenization? How do we get to a real life example of how a cultivator might do this, or how an edible manufacturer might do this, and so forth?
Yeah, and Murray, to take that even into context here, ANSI asks Z 1.4, when you really study it, you get into it, it requires it. So some states have not adopted that. They've just prescribed batch ranges and quality, this is what we're willing to accept. Some have used percentages of the batch size. But what I think has happened over the last few years is, when I was excited initially was sort of the openness of applying this how best fits your production facility, which I still think is economically, commercially necessary. It kind of reaches this so complex that it's uncertain, and then it leads to other frustrations and challenges, because it's a difficult target for all of us to hit if everybody has different targets. So I just think it's an opportunity for some clarification.
when these rules were first created by AZDHS, I I recall a sample program being, not a sample program, but a sample size being part of the discussion. And if you had, say, a 100-pound harvest, there were certain protocols that I thought were put into place that would keep us from ensuring that, a employee didn't go to the one plant and pull the best samples off of it, and then that became a representative of the entire 100-pound batch. I was under the impression that we weren't doing that. I know that my previous job, we didn't do that. We homogenized samples from different parts of the room that were all the same strain, to ensure that when we posted a 20%, for example, potency, it was a representative of the entire harvest throughout the entire room. That's all.
Go ahead, Murray.
So if I understand right, Steve, you guys took, say, 5 or some number of samples, different places in the room, and you homogenized the individual samples?
That's correct. And then we would send it to the lab, and that would be the best we could do of ensuring that this was a representative of this harvest.
And they took the 5 samples, and what do they do? Pick one of them then to process?
No. It was in a jar, actually, and it would be a representative of all the samples were homogenized in that for that strain. So that would be one sample, and it would have, 6 to 8 grams worth of samples from different plants around the room in that one strain.
Did you have a protocol for where you sampled the flower on the plant?
Because I used to own a laboratory, I used to do sampling tests where we would do top, middle, bottom. And I always found that 3/4 of the way up was your most potent part of the plant. So it really didn't make a difference, though, Murray, from the bottom to the top. So I don't know exactly where the employee would pull the samples from, but if we were talking the top of the plant to the bottom of the plant, you may see a 1%, maybe a 2% difference, but then you have to add in instrument variation. So is it really the same, or is it the instrument that might be off 1 to 2%?
So when you ground this up, or I assume you took those samples, did you grind them up?
Yes, we ground them up.
What happened to the keef that would have fallen out or gotten attached to the blades of the grinder?
That was all part of the sample.
So you scraped that out, added it back into the container, and sent it to the lab?
That is correct.
Okay.
What did you use to break down the samples?
It was an open grinder, so when we would grind the top, everything would fall into the sample jar from the bottom, or through the top into the bottom. So could keef be left in the top? Yes, but every time we used it, it was a sterile, brand new grinder. So the amount that would be left there, Tim, was really insignificant and wouldn't really add to the potency in general. Remember, we're talking 5 to 7 grams of flour to make one test for a strain. So that was how we used to do it at my previous place of employment.
No, and I've seen sample prep have a big impact on testing. When I was in a different market in Canada, we were working with different labs and we were seeing different scores. We were sending whole flour in and they were handling the sample prep. And when we dug in on what was driving some of the differences, it was the sample preparation at the labs, right? Because that wasn't standardized. So just kind of an interesting aside. So I was curious because we found that one particular lab up there would come out with artificially low scores. And then when we dug on it, it was the way the samples were being prepped. And well, anyway, so.
I understand. Yeah, we looked at all sorts of different things. Look, back in the day when I was running my lab, all I wanted to do was put out the highest numbers possible, but I wasn't cheating on it. So we wanted to make sure that all the keef and all of the concentrate that would be residue left over from the sample was in that plant, was in the sample, so that it could get as high of a potency as possible. So, we looked at all sorts of different methods of doing it, and that was the best one we found.
And Murray, practically speaking, what I've just pulled up here is, the reference to the ANSI standard Z1.4. I'm going to plug it again. Please buy it if you haven't already. If you've never looked at it, please do. It's complicated, but once you get your head around it, it actually makes very practical sense on a lot of levels. But the thing to remember too is you have to collect the representative portion in an acceptable way. And there's 4 ways to do that, which the 4th being the same process you would follow to reduce the total amount you'd send to the lab. So you're not being asked to send 100% of the representative portion to the lab. You're asked to quarter that down to an amount that's acceptable by the lab. So different labs are at different ranges, 10 to 20 grams maybe. A little bit extra is always good because it allows some to be held back for secondary and tertiary testing if it's necessary. But these steps, top, middle, bottom, I heard somebody say using a sample thief. Sample thieves aren't practical for a lot of forms of marijuana. It's normally used in grain and liquids probably, but even our liquids in our market are semi-solids. They're very thick material, right? So that might not be the best way. The starting pattern, I think, is common. I think the discrete increments is common. But quartering it down until you get to the representative size. The representative size has nothing to do with the amount you're sending to the lab other than you're quartering it down to the amount that the lab needs. So anyway, I wanted to open the discussion to it and be as helpful as we can be. And I am inferring maybe there's some ways to clarify. Some of the rules are very clear, but things like whether or not it's appropriate to homogenize your aggregated representative portion, I do think the state has to tell us whether that's acceptable or not, right? And then some of the assumptions of normality in the population, I do think that from an analytics standpoint, we need to challenge. The closer to isolate it is, probably the more normal the population is distributed. But I don't make an assumption that there's a perfect bell curve associated with values. People need to understand too that like potency specifically, it's a range for a batch. We put a number on it in the lab and the label claim has to be within plus or minus 20% of that lab test, but it's still a range. So to say, what is the true value of this potency? Well, it's between X and Y, right? And hopefully it's on the normal distribution. And hopefully if you randomly pull a sample off the shelf, you hit within 1 or 2 standard deviations. But I mean, even Z1.4 is a 95% measure of uncertainty basis. So there's 5% even in that may not conform, right? So anyway, are there any other thoughts?
Just curious, have you investigated any other states just to see how they do it, or has anyone investigated other states just
Yeah,
to see?
so I have a lab in Las Vegas. We're required to sample. Our agents are, and so that is practical. I don't think it's a cost driver. I don't think it's gonna, it's just whether or not the relationship is trusted enough between industry and labs in the market you're in, and whether or not they think that will add value. So that's one comment, but then batch sizing, and it's a lot of it's very prescriptive in some states, and in some states where the program's working and in some states where the program's not working, it's prescriptive. I've not seen a lot of ANSI ask C1.4, and I've been involved in Massachusetts market, Colorado, Nevada, and California. And it's unique, which is both exciting and challenging, but it is hard to understand. And so like, that's the part that it's very frustrating when, even somebody said it on this. If I submit the same sample to 2 different labs, I get 2 different results. Well, what my presentation is about is you didn't send the same sample. It's not possible because no 2 nugs on the same branch or node of the plant are going to weigh the same. So the ratio of potency to density may be off. So you can't send the same sample. But again, that's why I infer that perhaps there has to be a normalization process at certain stages to see if this, can behave more naturally like the statistical models the rule is based on, is the point. So.
All right, you got your.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Nate's comments, which I I fully support. I think this is terrific. The thing that was off-putting early on about the sampling was, we looked at the sampling and we had this table to look at to try to figure out what the size of the batch, number of samples, and it just was confusing as hell. It was just very hard to understand. And the simplification of that table, providing better clarity for the cultivators, would have probably been very helpful at that time. I just want to throw that in. But my other remark was regarding edibles. Not insignificant number of edible manufacturers, and when I say that, I mean beverages, topicals, baked goods, the whole gamut. Not an insignificant number are basing their products on multiple cannabinoids, and in many cases they're using the natural cannabinoids of the plant, not doing any kind of spiking or whatnot. And so in a lot of respects, we get that same profile that you express in your flower ultimately in a significant number of our edible products. So we face the same consideration and the same challenges. Now, I can make a brownie exactly a certain size, and I can do my level best to medicate that brownie and homogenize the meds in it and the whole 9 yards. And I can still take 5 of those exactly the same brownies and ship them to 5 different labs. I'm going to get some variability. And I don't really think in this case, it's necessarily the sample being different. I think that there are realities of how labs use different protocols for their sampling preparation, different solvents, different length of time of the solvents, and so on. So the reality is the labs can only be so good. The numbers they deliver are accurate for what they do, but variable, as you say, they're really kind of a range. And people go, well, they freak out. What about the patient? What about the consumer? And we always forget that only in the case of edibles, only about 4 to 12% of the THC that you consume in an edible actually makes it into your bloodstream. The rest is filtered out by your liver. And there's some other things that go on, in your GI tract and so on that can raise the potency. But the simple truth is that most of the THC, most of the psychoactive compounds are filtered out by the liver. So the accuracy of plus or minus 5 or 10% when you're actually processing up to 12% of the entire amount is sort of lends value to the idea that it doesn't at the end of the day make that big a difference to the consumer. But I just want to add that edibles are in the same boat in terms of broader spectrum or full spectrum, multiple cannabinoids, and that, you're going to get some variability. You shouldn't across the batch of brownies because you're using the same material, but you do have that more complex product.
Yeah. And Murray, like you said, it's not limited to cannabinoids. It's really all the analytes. The labs, we're really agnostic on what the results are, right? We just measure what we see and we report what we saw. But like for all the contaminants, the same thing exists. It's the same reality. It's, your likelihood of pulling a random sample and testing hot is higher than a representative. Like it will benefit all aspects of the program to normalize the samples that are received at the labs. It will reduce the variability you see. And to Murray's point, yeah, there are differences in the outputs of the labs, right? Part of this process is how do you refine manufacturing and testing to improve public health and safety, right? And that requires standardizing as much as we can at each of these steps, right? Because then we can all be sure, things line up the same regardless, and you don't end up with a lot of variability in the system. So.
Well, I think, Nate, the labs are all performing, or most of them should be proficiency tests. So you're getting that standardization where you're comparing your lab across all the other labs, so you're not going to be way out there. So I think that's another way we can show labs are being consistent, even they're using maybe slightly different methods. They're coming up close to each other.
Yeah, and I think what we observe is we fall at different parts of the distribution. Whether or not it's a normal distribution, I don't know. We don't have all the data, but anyway. Max, do you have any thoughts?
I have a quick question, actually. Yeah, thanks a lot for the presentation. You really educated me. I appreciate it. Nate, my question is, so you get data not just from Arizona and also from the other state, right? Like, have you ever looked at the number that you have from different analysts and see that they are actually normally distributed? Like what is the distribution of the data actually from what you already have?
We have not taken the time to study that yet.
Yeah, because the reason why I ask is that a lot of the time we assume data to be normally distributed, but this is not necessarily the case. Like sometimes the data, particularly if let's say like like there are some misapplication of pesticide for say, right? Like this is not a normally distributed, of current, right? As compared to if you're thinking about like cannabinoid, right? That might be a more likely to be normally distributed. It totally depends from analyte to analyte. So I was just wondering if if the assumption of your sampling method is based on the data being normally distributed. I mean, perhaps you can take a look at the data and see, like, are they normally distributed, like from the first place? Because I think that would be helpful to know.
Yeah, well, and what you bring up, we oversimplify conformity, non-conformity based on Z1.4 to a pass-fail, but you do have to look at the complexity of every analyte on table 3.1
Right.
to determine how they individually behave before you can assume that they'll function predictably in that same sampling model. So I mean, we've got a great program. It's well established, and there's a lot that's done. But I think what this reveals is, as time goes on, there's some refinement. And for me, I watch other states as they seem to sort of retroactively fix major things that probably could have been avoided in the first place, or could have been proactively resolved. Just pursuing subjects like this. How we test what we receive is a big deal. What we receive is a big deal. And I think that's probably a larger contributor, and, Murray may think it has more to do with the variation of the labs, and he may be right, but until we've defined it and we're all doing it the same way, I think that's the only way we can find it. So,
well, it's impossible for everybody to do it the same way, because I mean, we can go down the rabbit hole here, and we can go really far down the rabbit hole here with this. Then you start looking at standard age. How are they freezing their standards in between using their standards? Are the standards frozen on the instrument while it's there, or are they warm? There's a number of things that can add and detract from the potency of a product if we start going down this too far. So I would caution you to, there's certain things we can do, and then there's certain things that we really need to say, okay, we can talk and talk and talk until we're all blue in the face on this. We're not going to get anywhere on this.
yeah, no, I agree, Steve. And my comment about sameness, even though I get mad at the states sometimes, I mean similar or same. So I'm using them sort of, we can dial this in a little bit tighter, and I think it improves things. That's all. I don't think we have to jump to any extremes or do anything that's going to be commercially unviable or economically impractical. We've got a lot of stakeholders in the industry that could benefit from maybe some clarification and simplification even of this area. So
As long as their costs don't get increased.
yeah, no, I think quite the opposite.
Me too.
It would be good to know, how many cultivators feel like they've got their sampling nailed down versus those that are looking for guidance. If those were looking for guidance, then, I think it would be incumbent upon us to try to give them some kind of base model to use beyond, just the language that we find in the statute or in the rules. I just think that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, you got everything you need there, Nate? Any other last comments for Nate before we move on to our next agenda item? Okay, we'll move along. Our next agenda item is adding terpene testing, and Steve Cottrell, I believe this is what you're going to talk on.
Yeah, thank you. Look, terpene analysis has been something that has been on when we initially talked about what the rules should be. This was removed at the last minute. The terpenes, the flavonoids, the terpenes, the smells, this is all aromatherapy. And this is one of the oldest medicines that has ever existed. We know the medicinal benefits through smells and aromatherapies have been around forever. And I think that we're not improving this is a really low bar to hit by adding terpene analysis. It's going to give patients and customers a new advanced way to understand their medicine or their cannabis as they medicate with it. This is, it's not all about THC, and that's one of the biggest things right now is one of the biggest things that plagues most cultivators and this industry is customers come in and they ask for the most potent product on the shelf, period. I want the strongest stuff, period, because that's the best. Unbeknownst to them, that is not how it should be. It should be, I want to shop via certain terpenes, smells, and flavonoids of the plant because this is going to give them the experience and the results that they're looking for. I'd like to open a discussion about it because it's something that it is definitely a benefit to this program. It advances this program significantly. It helps the customers significantly. I know that dispensaries are going to say, well, great, it's going to increase costs, but you know what? I know terpene analysis is being done for under $25 per sample right now in this valley, and it's not a big increase to the costs of operations. It's just a better form. It's a better thing for the general population to understand what they are doing. Terpene analysis is mandated in New Mexico. It's mandated in Las Vegas or in Nevada. I believe it is in California. Nate, you can clarify on that. I know it is throughout many states on the East Coast. It just makes our program look a bit more legitimate, and with that, it also adds more legitimacy to this product for customers to understand better what they're selling and purchasing.
Go ahead, Murray.
So I applaud Steve's comments. We come from the medical side, having been an early dispensary license holder and a kitchen who obviously was making products for the medical side of things. And a lot of research in the last 5 years especially has shown the relevance of terpenes in terms of the consumer experience. And from a medical side, terpenes have gotten a lot more attention in recent years in terms of their benefits health-wise. We know that they interact with cannabinoids, within our system. We know that they operate or activate or affect the same receptors. And we now know that limonene, for example, a major terpene often found in cannabis, actually has the effect of reducing the anxiety related to too much THC. We've been so involved with the terpene side that we do everything we can to make sure it's in what products we make. It's not always possible because terpenes are volatile and you lose them pretty quickly, but they're really important. And I don't know if the rules and the statutes are written permit us to just simply add terpenes, but I can tell you it's something we do as a matter of course to test for those. We think that the evidence from the research side is showing that they're very, very important, perhaps in some cases more important than cannabinoids in pain relief. So if this conversation continues in terms of terpenes past this meeting, prior to the next meeting, Fabiola, I'll send you some background material to share with the committee that goes into some depth about where these terpenes and cannabinoids, how they work together, and particularly as it relates to human physiology.
Thank you, Murray.
Yep.
Steve, this is Nate. One of my thoughts is coming up with the list of terpenes that we would recommend might be helpful with their CAS numbers.
Yep.
So that'll give us, something to reference. I know I sent Joe Demena a couple of things. We've had a conversation about it specifically, and I do think there's a lot of supporting evidence for it, and it's common in most programs. It is required, maybe for different reasons, but it is required in California too, Steve, to answer your question.
Okay.
They don't want you adding too much, I think, is really the source of where that rule set came from. But being accurate in labeling on terpene claims, I think, is a huge added value.
Agreed.
And we're all testing for it anyway. So I think every lab has equipment for it. We run solvents on the same machine, you know, so it shouldn't be a huge driver, if any. And I think Steve's sort of nuanced reference to $25, that sounds right. So.
Jay, thank you. Comment or question?
Yeah, I just wanted to support Steve and what he was saying. You know, this is something we've been asking for from the very beginning. It means a lot to consumers because, you know, they have effects themselves, just like THC does. Some of these terpenes will make you tired. Sorry, I got my junior here with me today. Yeah, they have effects on your body too as well, like the THC and the CBD. The industry itself is moving towards identifying plant types based off of cannabinoids and terpenes instead of indica sativa hybrid. So there's groups of terpenes that more closely relate in the sativa family and in the indica family that show exactly what they are. So it's something that the industry is moving to as a whole. You'll see in other states where, especially in competitions and things like that, they're not referencing to them as indica sativa hybrid. They're referencing to them as what the terpene group is. You know, it's just something that we've been missing for a long time, something that's important. It shows that, you know, we're really looking at the medicinal value instead of how high can this make me. So definitely an advocate for that. Also, I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but cannabinoid testing is the same machine and can be done at the same time as terpenes, if I'm not mistaken.
I want to also add that it's not just the high itself, but it's the quality of that high. The experience itself is in terms of sedation, in terms of energy, in terms of just you know, feeling pleasant. And I'm talking to you, Megan.
The entourage effect.
I just threw that last bit in for you, Megan.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It is the entourage effect. Steve's absolutely right, and it is important.
Okay, thank you for bringing that forward, Steve. Any more questions or comments for Steve?
And if anyone has information on either of these and wants to see it on an agenda going forward, and potentially, you know, having something on the agenda that can be voted on in the future, please contact Viola. She'll be waiting to hear from you. Yes.
Okay, if there are no more comments, I believe that was the final item on our agenda. So just as a wrap up, just like to mention that we do have, I think I'd said 3 positions. We've actually got 4, right? So we've got 4 positions vacant. I'll just run through those again, just in case any of you have any ideas on who might be able to fill these roles and help us make sure we can attain quorum at all of our meetings. But first vacancy is a designee of a statewide nonprofit cannabis testing association. Next position is a registered dispensary agent. The third position is a lab scientist. And the final position is a licensed healthcare provider. So if anyone has any ideas on who might fill that role, or you know anyone who might be interested, please push them our way, and we'd be happy to see if they meet the qualifications to fill those roles. I believe Fabiola and others will be reaching out regarding the next meeting to get some dates that work for all of you so that we can meet again. And again, as always, if you have items that you would like to see on the agenda, please send those to us. Really appreciate all of you taking the time to join today. And we look forward to talking to you at the next meeting. Have a good rest of your week. Oh, sorry. I call for a motion before everyone goes. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
I
Aye.
Okay, we're
Nice.
technically adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
I almost forget that sometimes.